department.
Yeah, certainly.
Going to the lay service last Sunday made me realize you really have a full morning.
It's,
Gosh,
and then some.
with morning.
It's a busy day.
Oh,
Usually try not to do a whole lot after lunch.
I would hope not.
So,
But see, you're living your faith, so of course the day's full.
guess I need to move this a little closer.
Where are all our
Yeah.
Sunday people?
Yuck.
And how many people think a pastor's job is this Sunday morning?
Yep, a lot.
Oh, I'll tell you a story. It's a true story. It happened to me when I was a vicar, which was obviously a lot of years ago. This kid named Michael or Mikhail, because he was German. His parents were German. Father worked in the World Bank. However, he had been born in this country, so I don't think he ever lived in Germany. I mean, legally, I guess this isn't. Whatever. Anyway, so he asked me one day, he said, "So, vicar, what's your real job?" And I said, "This is my real job. I'm a student thing." And, "Oh, well, I mean, what do you really do?" So that week happened to be, I forget, I don't have any recollection, but there were meetings, things, everything was scheduled. I said, "Why don't you come with me this week?" So every day there was something that, besides just sitting in an office twiddling thumbs. And so he said, "Well, no, that's okay." So, but his impression was it was just a Sunday morning thing too.
Well, a lot of churches in
So
Germany.
we're going to start, because we have lots of things to do today. We'll start with a brief prayer, and then we'll do our recap over what we went through last week. We pray. Gracious Lord, open our hearts and lives to you again on this day of Pentecost. May your Spirit continue to descend on us, to open our hearts, open our lives to you as we share the good news with others. And as we look again, we look at the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus, we pray that we might be people to be witnesses of that to the world that needs to hear it today. We ask that in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. So I'm going through some of the things. There were 5 pages today. Sorry, I kept cutting it down, and that's what I ended up with. You're going to have to read them all for yourself. I'm not going to read it all, but number 1, the denouement, the final part of the narrative, where it all comes together. That's what Volz calls this, and I think that's pretty well. I think significant is number 4. Jesus cried out with a loud voice. When people died in a crucifixion, they did not cry out with a loud voice, because they usually were, some of them were even unconscious, could not speak much at all or anything like that. And so Jesus has a very loud voice. And the choice of word is interesting. The boao, the emphasis, as opposed to krazo, which is to scream, to cry. Cry, ooh, it's supposed to be out, sorry about that. To cry out, the difference is important because the boao there's an emphasis, it's an appeal for help specifically to a God who can be trusted. That's how it's used. And so it's not a cry of despair, but it's a cry knowing that there is a positive outcome that will come. At least that's what can come from the word itself. Number 7. Jesus suffers God's judgment upon the sin that he bears alone. Not only does he die with no one to comfort or aid him, but God the Father does nothing to help him. I think that would be difficult for all involved, all members of the Trinity. Number 8, this is the only saying from the cross recorded by Mark.
Oh.
Now, don't know what that means, but it's just an interesting point that this is the one he says.
This business about shouting is interesting because I was just reading this section this week, and I was thinking about the people on either side of him, the bad guys, and it occurred to me that they kept mocking him, and it's exactly what I thought. How did they have the breath to do that?
Well, but it's not saying all the way through. I mean, maybe it was at a point there.
Early, yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
only mentioned, it does not say in detail how much they did, so I don't know. The number 9, the last phrase about it is that when he's crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" the emphasis is he does say, my God, and so he continues to refer to his Father God in that part. Number 15, that's from verse 37, a loud cry, and he breathed his last. I'm sorry?
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but this is difficult for me to understand. Why do you think he was saying, why have you forsaken me? He knows all this, right?
Well, remember, we have Jesus who is God and man, and my first response would be, that's the human Jesus. I mean, he's experiencing this. He knows the answer, but still, I mean, we know the answer. When we die, we go to heaven, but why do people suffer? I mean, there are lots of questions that we have. Yeah, that's a good question. I can't say that I can answer it very well.
You did.
Well, I don't know. It's an unsatisfactory beginning answer. Number 15, let out a loud cry, breathed his last. The word expire, ekreino, is an interesting word, to expire, to blow out. And some of the commentators like to emphasize that he's breathing out his spirit. And what they want to do with that, I found this interesting to think about. What they want to do with that, it's only after he breathes out his spirit, and kind of like the Spirit of God is going out into the world or something, that this is when the centurion is able to speak. It's only after that. Now, I'll put a lot there. You know, you can do whatever you want with that, but I found it an interesting thing to consider. Sometimes these things are things that we can consider and go, I don't know about that, though. 16, Jesus was conscious to his last breath. And one sentence emphasized the strength of the cry indicates that he did not die the ordinary death of those who were crucified. Number 17, with regards to the curtain, you know, there's the questions of is it the inner one or the outer one? It seems to me to make sense that it's the outer one because that's the one that then people could see. Otherwise, the religious leaders could not let people know about it. It would be inside and such like that. So I don't know. It's interesting. And of course, I think we talked about it in the class that there was stuff on the cosmos on that. So the heavens were rent asunder. I mean, you can make that too.
The interesting thing for me is it was going from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
And Cindy was telling me she was reading, and the curtain was, I don't know how, it was really thick. It wasn't a little thing, but were really thick type things. I don't know. So I found that interesting as well. Number 20, from a historical standpoint, Jesus' death was unusual. It was normal in certain ways, but his expiration was very quick. He died strongly with a loud voice after shouting. There's something special about all of that. And 21 emphasizes the centurion's words. This was the Son of God. That's Colwell's rule. You can read the rule there. And the other interesting things is that the other Greek manuscripts, there's no variant readings that would make it so it would be a son. So they all read the same like that. 22, I think, is interesting. In the Gospel of Mark, the Son of God is the Son of the Father's whose voice proclaims his Son divine identity and nature from the sky. That's back in 1:11. And from the cloud on the mountain of transfiguration, that's 9:7. And in 14:61, the centurion's confession at the end of Jesus' earthly mission corresponds to the voice from the sky at the beginning of that mission. So it kind of is almost like bookends at the beginning and the end. And 29 kind of says that in a slightly different way as well. An appropriate
idea of bookends is really important because I've been doing a lot with the lessons in the Old Testament with the rabbi. And again, he shows you that 4 books apart are the 2 ends of a bookend.
27. In the Greek text, it's interesting. The burial of Jesus has 101 words, 106 for the final hours, the part we just looked at. And the other thing that's interesting to me is all of this is so quick in Mark's gospel. The one piece that you have, this double piece, made this up yesterday. He picked up one of these. I tried to put in this is the resurrection of Jesus, according to Matthew, Luke, and John. So the second page is Luke on the left-hand side and John on the right-hand side. I ran out of room to put it, it wouldn't print there. So this is all, I mean, the interesting thing to me is how long, excuse me, I'm saying it backwards, how short Mark's words are. Very short and concise. And you have to go to other Gospels to read much more. And it would be the same if I had done that with the death and the burial part. Very short and quick, interestingly enough. 28 points out the thing that, I guess I don't remember this. It doesn't, you know, the bullet points there. It's not uncommon for a body to be left on a cross, to rot or be eaten by birds or animals. That's really lovely, right? So, going to be there. And so if this isn't a public place as it's supposed to be, people could go by and say, oh, well, it's still there, or birds, I mean, that's terrible. And in actual practice, if the relatives of a condemned man sought permission for burial, the body was usually given to them, but that's up to the head Roman guy, whether he does that or not. And by law, he does not have to. By law, just leave it there, too bad. Can you imagine that? It's showing the utter disregard, right?
Yeah.
I remember when John the Baptist was buried. Trying to remember, were they able to bury his head? I don't think it says anything. They buried him.
Came and got his body, but
yeah, I don't remember that. And Saul, Old Testament Saul, and his sons were hung up, and the men from Kiryat Jearim went and got him and buried them, but I don't remember if they got the heads as well either, you know, so it's really, that's sad type thing. 30 emphasizes that the usually request for the body would come from a member of his family, maybe even from his disciples. It's different. 32, Pilate is surprised that he's already dead. That word, he's amazed. Jesus continues to amaze Pilate in death. You mean he's already dead? 2 to 3 days is not unusual for someone dying. And 33, Mark alone mentions the detail that Pilate assured himself that the Centurion responsible for the overseeing of the execution that Jesus had been dead for some time. Are you sure? Yes, he brought him in. He's the only one that does that, which, again, I find that interesting. I don't know what it means, but I find it interesting. The cloth, number 35, is a sindon, which is the same word used for the young man. Remember him? It's interesting that this cloth, you also have at the resurrection a young man. It's the same word used there as that. And with a cloth, although it's a different word, interesting there as well. 36 talks about 2 types of graves, and it appears it's a good chance it's the second type of grave, an arcosolium, which would be bigger, and that one would have a round stone as opposed to a rectangular one. I found it interesting, 37 talks about square or rectangular stones, usually only 500 pounds. I'm sorry, how easy is it to move a 500-pound stone if it's square or rectangular? And a round stone up to 3,000 pounds. Wow. So we're talking big. And so I forget which one, we'll read it there. Which one of the ladies said, well, who's going to move the stone for us? So I guess it doesn't matter if it's a square 500-pound stone or a round 3,000-pound stone. Either one's going to be hard
to move. So are those stones literally in that area, or they have to get them there, or what?
Well, oftentimes the graves were dug out of places where they had dug stone out of quarries and all. Okay. So there would be some available. Okay. Well, look at some of the stones they have for the temple that are still there. Some of those, apparently some of the temple stones are bigger than were used in the pyramids. Some of them are giant stones.
They were quarried from underneath the temple area. And Judy and I saw a tomb with a round stone in a groove.
Whoa.
Number 38, the verb there, roll, kind of is used to say, hey, that's probably, well, especially since it was Joseph of Arimathea, he apparently was an important, influential, and wealthy fellow. He probably had the fancier type of stone without using the verb to make that. And 39, 2 women. I think it's important to have the 2 women there because then it shows that they know where the place was, and so they did not go to the wrong place, as some would suggest. I think that's important.
Well, in terms of,
I'm sorry?
in terms of moving the stones, I mean, that's actually fairly simple. You just need a fulcrum. Some type.
I'll let you do it.
Oh, you just get a, 10-foot stout wooden pole, and you can do it.
Jim will bring a 500-pound rectangular. No, I think it's possible, yeah. But
All you need is an angel.
That's true.
You just need an angel to come and open it up.
or you need, in this gospel, a young man. It says young man. Interesting. Okay. Chapter 16, I'm sorry, 10.
Is there any connection with this interment and the mausoleums? We don't see them anymore, or many anymore, but is that somehow the mausoleums that were created in cemeteries and in relationship to this?
I'll give you the best answer I can. I don't know. I don't know.
I think
A mausoleum, and a mausoleum, I'm trying to think. They don't, I'm not thinking of mausoleum, I can't think of the word, where you place, the cremated remains is a different phrase. There's a special word for that. It's not a mausoleum.
A columbarium or something?
That sounds correct, yeah. I don't know, Tim.
Which brings
You know,
up,
what's interesting is that the Jewish practice was that well, we're kind of getting in here. They're going to bring spices. That's in verse 1 of chapter 16. And it's not an embalming process. It is a process of lessening the smell. And so the body would be clean, generally washed. It doesn't mention that in chapter 15, but since it was this fancy cloth, it's assumed that he did that, although there's a timing issue for all of this as well, because the Sabbath is coming, and it's an important Sabbath, which makes it even more important not to mess up, because you'll miss Passover and all that stuff. And so body would be wrapped and placed on basically on a long bench in there. It's going to be fancier in the time that Jesus probably had, but the regular type of tomb, there would be a location, and after approximately a year, there would be an ossuary, a box that would contain the bones, and someone would go in and take the bones and place them in the box, and then the box would be placed in almost like a mausoleum, in kind of little slots in there, and that's where they would find those. They find the bone boxes, the ossuaries, all over the place, and all. And there was one recently in the last 10 years, archaeologically, it's recently, I guess, right? Where they found one and they were trying to say it was Jesus' bone box. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
There were questions about that. Of course, the name Jesus, Yeshua, is not an unusual name in Jewish circles and such things. So, but to answer your question, I don't know the connection between, I don't know where mausoleums came from, I guess. I don't know. That's your job to look it up. You can give us a complete report. 10 minutes, double space type, no.
as we're going through this, is a question about cremation, since you're bringing it up. For a long time, the Lutheran Church wouldn't allow it. And then suddenly they changed their mind. What was the reason why they would not allow it?
Don't know.
Okay.
For a long time, the Lutheran Church also practiced that you should not have life insurance because you weren't trusting in God.
Oh, yeah, I knew that.
And so that changed. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
I guess that's what you get to look up to find out when.
I
I don't know exactly where to even look that one up. To be honest, I don't know. That's an interesting one as well.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else? You want to go to 16?
Yes.
16, we're doing 1 to 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they could go and anoint him. Well, this is a fun one right here. So the Sabbath is over. What does Sabbath run? Sabbath runs sunset to sunset. So sunset would then be Saturday, in our rendering, Saturday evening, right? After the sun has set. So Mary Magdalene, we know who she is. There's questions about who Mary, the mother of James. Some texts, well, it actually says Joseph, Joses, and some suggest it might be Mary, the mother of Jesus. So there's lots of discussion there. We're not exactly sure. Same person probably from who was there the night before, I'm sorry, not the night before, when Jesus was buried. And Salome is another character we've met before. So again, the spices are used to help with the smell and such. It's and what's interesting is the word for anoint, emphasize, is kind of pouring, and so it's thought that those would be liquid spices or spices that are somehow in some type of liquid there. So the question is, exactly when did Jesus rise? When would you say?
Dawn at sunrise on Sunday morning. Because the Sabbath.
Define Sunday morning.
Well, the Sabbath was Saturday, so.
Well, the Sabbath is sundown Friday to
6
sundown Saturday.
Right.
6 a.m.
6 a.m.? You've got the time?
That's Sunday morning, that's the first hour.
Well, it's interesting that the Jewish timing system and the Greek Roman seem to be almost interchanged at different times, and that may be one of the reasons that we get so confused about it, I think. But it would be after Sabbath is over and sometime early in the morning before the women come there that Jesus is alive. So it's parts of 3 days then, right?
Yeah.
Because it would count, he's on our Friday, which would be the day before Sabbath, then Sabbath begins at Friday sundown through Saturday sundown, and then then there's time before Sunday morning, so that's the other part, so that would be the 3 days. It's not 3 24-hour periods of time, but sometime in that type thing. Mr. Jim?
Yes, what is the length of time that Jesus spent in hell? Was it 3 days, 1 day?
There's only one good reference, and that's in 1 Peter, and it does not say. I'm not going to hazard a guess. Why did he go to hell?
To proclaim
To
his
show the
victory
victory.
over the
Yes,
devil.
that's what I was gonna say.
Did he suffer in hell?
No.
No. Remember the Greek word
victorious
tetelestai, it is finished, paid in full, emphasizes at that point all sins are paid for, so he didn't have to go to. My explanation for it, what I always told the kids, is I call it a victory lap.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
If you think about it that way, he goes there to proclaim you have been defeated and all.
Right.
When we lived in Indiana, football, basketball were big things in high school sports. And so I remember Rochester went to play Tippy Valley. They beat Tippy Valley, and Tippy Valley is a small town, maybe twice as big as Cordova. So it's not real big, right? Pretty small. Well, there's a little bigger downtown area. And so as the kids are coming back, the football team and the cheer people, they're hanging out of the bus windows, right? Yelling that we've won type thing. And that's kind of what happens. Or we used to have NASCAR nets, I knew. And that would be, the car going around and, at the victory lap, I've defeated. So I don't know how long type thing. And it's interesting, if you look at the 1 Peter, it's kind of mentioned in passing. It's not the main purpose of the text. And it's really just kind of there quickly and doesn't really go into it in great detail. So I would not hazard a guess.
Is there any church fathers who have ventured forth thoughts on this?
I don't remember reading them. I'm sure they have, but I do not have that info. I have no idea. And I think
I mean, it's in
interesting.
Apostles' Creed, so I would assume that there's a history of the phrase.
Well, the Apostles' Creed also kind of is interesting how it came to be, and there's not a lot of detail on that as well, so where exactly it came from.
It's an interesting thought that if time is not of God, time is something that we're allowed because we're human, then the moment he stopped being human, then time didn't.
I'm sorry, Jesus stopped being human?
Well, okay. When he died, the
Okay.
man part of him died. And when he went to heaven as a man and as God. But the fact of the matter is, he's been acting as if he's God ever since, as far as I'm concerned. And what that means to me is, time is not, he sees tomorrow and yesterday and today all in one piece, rather than the way we see it, right?
It seems to me that time is a creation of God.
Oh.
I mean, that's what, I don't know, that seems to me.
I've read otherwise, and I'd love, I guess I better read more about that.
I don't know.
Assumed.
That's what it seems to me.
God created the universe, and that's what we use to mark our time.
Right.
So God made it possible for us to divide it up into 365 and a quarter days.
That's what I thought.
And as far as navigation by the stars and
Yes.
how these things work, God created that. So
Yeah,
God
true.
gave us the means.
Right. That's, okay, good, thank you. This is hard stuff.
Makes you think, and that's good.
That's right. I read once that the women never got any sleep that night after he died because it takes a long time to prepare this, I read. So they spent all night preparing the stuff and went out really early in the morning.
So they were sleepy and they went to the wrong tomb, then is that, I don't know.
Whose theory was that?
There's some interesting theories about that goes way off.
Verse
Verse 2, how about verse 2?
Yeah.
Very early in the morning, it's interesting the words there, very early, and that Sabbathon, that's Sabbath, so it's interesting, very early in the morning, in the first day of the week, exceedingly early. So that's like before, I guess it does say at sunrise. And sunrise is after the sun has risen. So it's that time, is that a double meaning too, that after the sun has risen, Jesus has risen, the sun is coming up as well. They were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb for us? Interesting. Who's going to, and they don't sing, in this one, they don't seem to have an understanding that the tomb had been sealed and that there were guards there.
Oh.
That's in other texts, right? It does not imply that at all here. Looking up, they noticed that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. There's no mention of anybody else there. There's no mention of guards or anyone else. So the stone has been rolled away. And when they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side. They were alarmed. It just tickles me. I don't know why, that he's sitting on the right side. I don't know why that detail, it's just an interesting thing. And they were alarmed. Ekthambeo, very excited to be alarmed. And so you can be used both positively or negatively. Here they were great, there's a lot of fear. And you notice when God does something big, there often is a lot of fear. I'm thinking back, since we're in Mark, you could go back to the Transfiguration. There's fear there, right? Where the disciples, the three guys there, they fall down in great fear because of this. There's this presence of God. Something is going on. And I think the women understand, the words there to me imply that they know it's just that, it's not just someone stolen the body, but something has gone on, something big. And again, we hear, do not be alarmed. Don't be afraid. Isn't it interesting that that's often has to be spoken when God is active in ways to Mary, do not be afraid, for you will be, the Holy Spirit is with you, you will be with child. How many times does God say, do not fear? Jesus himself had to say it several times. And so when something big, something of God is happening, that they say, there's oftentimes it's do not be afraid. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they put him. You could almost see him pointing to the spot. And notice what's not there. It doesn't say they saw the burial clothes, not the piece on the head folded up. You'll have to look at one of the other texts there. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him just as he told you. It's interesting about the crucified part. Jesus remains the one who was, I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to go back. Young man, again, young man, it's not angelos, which would be angel, a white robe. Why an emphasis on why does it say a young man? Why not an angel? Are there other instances where we get that, where it would say a young man there, in emphasis of being an angel? I mean, we know it's an angel. We have enough other ones. You could read any of the others that uses angel and all the others. And it's interesting that it's a young man here. And I don't know if that's because we have the young man running away. It's not the same young man. No, this is obviously a messenger from God. But isn't it interesting that that's the word choice that's used? They were along, crucified. That was the other one. Crucified. Volz said something interesting to me, that he says, our Lord Jesus is never not the crucified one. It's an interesting way to put it. Our Lord Jesus is never not the crucified one. That he is the one who was crucified. He remains the crucified one, even though he is risen from the dead. But he always bears those. Remember that they can see those marks still at this point. And he has risen is an interesting verb form, because our dear commentators try to emphasize that it's not an external force doing this, but a force internal to him that causes this to occur. Although you can read in a couple of other passages that speaks about God the Father raising him, but the way the word is done there tries to make it that it's something that he himself is doing, which I found interesting. I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but it was an interesting thing. Notice how Peter is referred to. Why do you think Peter is referred to there? That's in verse 7.
Yeah.
Go tell his disciples and Peter. Remember, we believe this book's written by John Mark. John Mark was writing down Peter's thoughts and all. What had Peter done before this? He denied Jesus 3 times. You have to go to John's Gospel at the end in chapter 21, I think it is, where Jesus will then restore him. It takes 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me more than these? Do you love me? I love you. You know everything and all of that type of stuff. But here, and it's interesting that perhaps this is something for those folks there in Rome, the first readers of this, the first people who did this, that they need that extra, that, you can be restored even if you deny that, because they're going to go through some difficult times as well, that God is good and he will restore you back even if you fail him. I mean, we all fail to varying degrees.
But I think this is a great kindness of Jesus, because Peter must have been feeling horrible this whole time. And just to be reassured that he's still being called.
But you'll notice that Peter is one who runs to the tomb. Now, we don't
true.
have that in this one, right? If you look in the other ones, if you look, let's see. Peter runs to the tomb. Sorry. In Luke chapter 24, verse 12, Peter, however, I need to do verse 11 too. Nope, I need to go back to verse 9. Returning from the tomb, they reported all these things to the 11 and to the rest. These are the women. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with him were telling the apostles these things. But these words seemed like nonsense to them, and they did not believe the women. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. When he stooped to look in, he saw only the linen cloths, so he went away amazed, there's that word again, at what happened. And it goes on from there. In John's Gospel, it's in chapter 20, verse 6. Then following him, that's the disciple the other disciple, we believe it was John. I guess I need to go at verse 3. At that, Peter and the other disciple went out, heading for the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and got to him first. Ha, I beat you. No. Stooping down, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. Then following him, Simon Peter also came. He entered the tomb and saw the linen cloths lying there. The wrappings had been on his head, were not lying with the linen cloths, had been folded up in a separate place by itself. It's believed that's put there because grave robbers would not do such things with cloths like that and be so kind and all of that. So it kind of emphasizes that something special had happened. The other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, saw, and believed, for they did not yet understand the scriptures that he must rise from the dead. And so, I mean, it tells us more about them, again, in the other Gospels, I suppose. But go tell, make sure you tell the disciples. And Peter, again, he's going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there, just as he told you. Notice then, there's no other appearances of Jesus there in Mark's Gospel. No more. I mean, we don't have Jesus and the two disciples on the way to Emmaus. We don't have it listed that Jesus is speaking to any of the women, as the other Gospels will talk about it. We don't have Jesus' appearance in that locked upper room on Easter Sunday evening, I believe. And we don't have the whole thing about Thomas, who wasn't there, and then Thomas who then disbelieved, and then the next Sunday that Thomas who believed. We don't have any of that in Mark's Gospel up to this point. And we don't have that in verses 9 through 20 that we'll look at next week as well. So it's interesting that none of that is listed. It's short, it's concise, it's fast. And what is the response? How does verse 8 leave us? And what do you think about that if the gospel ended there? They went out and ran from the tomb because trembling and astonishment overwhelmed them, and they said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. Not very satisfying ending. Is it a satisfying ending?
No. Pretty human, though.
Just since we're going to look at those next time, we won't go into many detail, but there are two different endings after this. There's a non-verse ending, which I find interesting, which is a paragraph. It's about like verse 8, if I remember correctly. That's one of the possibilities that is found in some texts. Not a lot, but it's found in some. And then there's the verses that are numbered 9 through 20 that you will probably find in your text, right, with the lines above it now, that are there from the Textus Receptus, which was the text that was used when King James was translated and all. But it's interesting that there actually are two different after verse 8s, and the one that is more accepted is the verses 9 through 20, interestingly. But I'll give you the text for those next time as well. The folks that put this up are interested in this because they will point out the following. Verse 1, the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. This is Mark, right? This is Mark saying this is what his story is. This is it. He wants you to believe this. It's halfway through, right, where we get the conversation in chapter 8, verses 27 to 33, where Jesus finally asked, who do people say that I am? But then who do you say that I am? You are the Messiah. There's somebody saying who he is. And then we looked at then the Centurion who says, this man was the Son, definite article, not a son, the Son of God. And then it ends. If it ends there in this ending, they would suggest the abrupt ending is intentional. Mark emphasizes the shocking claim that the crucified and risen Jesus is the Messiah. Goes back here, goes back here. The lack of closure forces you to ask, will you run away or will you recognize the crucified Jesus as your king? It's an interesting way to look at it. It makes me wonder if I were a Christian in Rome, would that confront me with my circumstance and all of that? You know, I was reading different ones because you can read lots of different stuff about the ending going from here on to the rest of what Mark is written in many Bibles. And certain of the commentators say that nobody believes that that's part of the original text. And then I was reading N.T. Wright, who's a British, he's an Anglican bishop type guy, who's written a whole lot of stuff. He says, well, it's obvious that this is part of the original text. So you have one Bible scholar saying yes, those others saying no. And the real funny thing is, I'll have to bring that commentary, the Volt's commentary. It's a 2-volume set for Mark, and they're about yay thick, and really thick things. You know, they're about the size of this Bible each. And one half, and it goes through 8. First half goes through here, and then the other half. But it's interesting, in the second volume, it's actually written by 2 people, because Volt stops here, and the editor of the entire series then does the rest of it. So I would have liked to have been the fly in the room as they're discussing this, you know, what are we going to do? And it's almost like the guy says, I'm not going to write the rest of it because it doesn't fit there. Well, we have to have the rest of it in there, so you write it. I don't know what they said. It's just interesting to think. I want you to look at these 2 pages if you have these. These are interesting to me because the different text. Notice how Mark is the shortest. This is just resurrection text. Matthew is the next longest, and I think then Luke is the longest. I didn't count the words, but you'll notice I tried to put them on. I got the first part on, I got all of Matthew on the front page, but I ran out of space putting all of it on the second, and it just barely fit. I had to keep making the text smaller. I'd rather have it larger. But you'll notice that much about what we talk about Jesus' resurrection is in other Gospels. It's not here in Mark's Gospel. Look at Matthew, for example. In Matthew's Gospel, I found this interesting. Verse 2, there was a violent earthquake because an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and approached the tomb. He rolled back the stone and was sitting on it. So it emphasizes how the stone got rolled back. Does Mark do any of that? Nope, doesn't say any of that. Interesting. And so he's sitting on it, and that is an angel there. Clothing is white and all, but it mentions guards and such. And he tells the women when they come in verse 5, don't be afraid. Fear, of course, seems to be a natural response, because I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay, then go quickly and tell his disciples. It doesn't say, and Peter, does it? He has risen from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Listen, I have told you. And so we do get the fear. Notice it's interesting, a connection of fear and great joy. That's a wonderful connection of those two mixed together type thing, which I think is a great joy. Is he really risen? But we're afraid because of the circumstances and all. And then they have an experience of Jesus. Greetings. And they came to his feet and worshiped him at that point. And so then it tells us about the guards and what they did as well. Look at Luke's gospel. It's interesting. Also, they were bringing the spices. They found the stone rolled away. It doesn't say the angel did it. They didn't find the body. They're perplexed. It's not that they see the angel there, but suddenly, notice the words there. There are 2 men standing by. Angels are often described as men, right? And so they're standing there in dazzling clothes. They were terrified and bowed to the ground. That reminded me of this whole thing, the 3 disciples going down on the ground type thing. And so then, why are you looking for the living among the dead? I want to go ahead because I don't want to go through all of it. It tells you who the women are. We already read the thing about Peter and this thing. And this is the interesting addition that's in Luke, is verses 13 and following, where we have the 2 disciples going home to Emmaus, talking, and all that Jesus did. That's a wonderful thing. And in verse 25 and 26, wouldn't it be wonderful to be there and hear this? I guess verse 27 is the one where he interpreted for them the things concerning himself and all the scriptures. And so then they, why is this only in Luke? I don't know. You know, it's interesting to me. So finally they go back to, after they figure out it's Jesus, they go back, that's in verse 36. They go back, and that's when the rest of the disciples have an experience of Jesus as well. And then John adds the other interesting things where we have more of a personal thing with Mary Magdalene. So did she hang out? It's almost like she continued to hang out while the rest of them went back. And she's outside in verse 11 crying, saw the two angels. Did the others see the two angels? I don't know. It's interesting how different ones emphasize, why are you crying? They've taken away my Lord. I don't know where they put him. She turned around and saw Jesus, but she didn't know it was Jesus. Notice they don't notice who it's Jesus right at the beginning. Why are you crying? Who are you looking for? If you've carried him away, thinking he was the gardener, tell me where you've put him, and I will take him away. Then all he has to say to her is Mary. It's interesting. He says Mary, and she knows who he is. And it's don't cling to me. The verb form there is don't keep on clinging to me. And so she tells the disciples that she's seen the Lord. And then Jesus shows up and all. But it's interesting how different ones emphasize different aspects. And again, they wanted you just to have that to think about, because Mark's gospel is the shortest of all of them. It's very short. And if it ends here, it ends in an interesting way. The reason we talk about that is the earliest manuscripts have it end here. The oldest manuscripts have it end here. It's later ones that add additional things. So the question that scholars ask is, well, wasn't a very satisfactory ending? We don't like it ending with being afraid. My response is we have other ones where we have more information after that. And if Mark's going for this, could be, maybe that's what he's going for, to make you have to really ponder what's your answer about who Jesus is. Would you just run away frightened, or would you then tell the disciples and say, other things? We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But it's interesting how, at least in my mind, how short and sweet this is. Very quick, basic, boom, boom. He's alive.
I find
What do you
it particularly interesting that the centurion at the cross says this was the Son of God. He had no evidence that Jesus was going to rise. He saw the dying Christ and believed that. But we got these other soldiers who took big money to tell everybody that the disciples stole the body. So how come, having seen the actual evidence of the resurrection, they couldn't believe? It's interesting.
It's interesting, the question of who were the people guarding the tomb. Were they Romans and soldiers, or were they part of the temple guard? Some suggest it would be temple guard, and that's why they were able to the religious leaders were able to do that, because my understanding, if you were a Roman soldier and fell asleep on that, you would be killed.
Yeah.
So it's one of those questions where you can go back and forth on that. So it might be different people doing that, because the centurion has done his job. He has finished it. Jesus is dead. He's able to tell Pilate that. We do have that information. We're certain of that. We looked at that last week, right? He's dead. That's it. Okay, you can have the body. Pilate thought it was over. And, surprise, it's not. It's kind of those things. The other interesting thing on all of this is the emphasis in Mark. It's not seeing is believing. Believing then brings forth sight.
Right.
It's the exact opposite. And that goes through the whole thing, I think. And as you look at for example, Jesus on the cross, where the religious leaders are saying, if you are, come down and then we will believe. But look at all Jesus had done to show them who he was. All they had to do was to see and they could believe, and none of those times did they actually believe. And so in Mark, it seems to be the exact opposite. Believing brings forth that sight, that certainty.
Mm-hmm.
It's the exact opposite. Something else?
I got one more for you. Early on, verse 2, very early in the morning on the first day of the week. It confuses me in that, did the Jews experience their Sabbath as the last day of their week? Or have we now changed to the Greek?
Well, this is in Mark that you have both of these timing, these systems.
I didn't realize.
That's why it gets confused. I think that's why sometimes it says on the 3rd hour and the 6th hour, I mean, all of that.
Yeah.
So I think, it's kind of like, the first day of the week,
So that's written for us, not for the Jews.
remember, so this is Mark writing in Rome to a Roman audience.
Right,
That's the
right.
first ones we believe, so therefore it would probably make sense then
Yeah.
to do that.
But the Jews, like us, thought of the Lord's Day as the first day of the week. Right. Okay, thank
It can get confusing.
you. Yeah. We're supposed to, it makes us look harder, right?
Makes you think. I don't like thinking. Oh, I forgot this. I brought here, this is the Lost Scriptures. This is a book by Bart Ehrman, who is a theologian down in one of the Carolina schools, who does not, he's a very liberal scholar. He does not believe a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. I think that's fair to say. But there's a reference in, this is about women being the first ones to see as witnesses, because we just kind of skipped over that and missed that part of it. But the women in all of these are the first witnesses, and so women were not really allowed to be witnesses in the Jewish culture. And so the church, that's not who, if we're making a story up, we're going to have, if I were writing this, I would have Peter and James and John going there and seeing all of this happen and reporting back. That's who you would have do it. You would not have the women. I'm sorry, ladies, I'm not trying to demean you in any way. It's just in that society, you weren't doing that. So there is actually a Gospel of Peter. In the Gospel of Peter is one of these it never made it in the New Testament, obviously. Probably written about 250, one of the suggestions is, maybe a little bit early. And so this is a rewriting of the story. And so I'm going to read just a few verses about it. So start in verse 34 here. Early in the morning, as the Sabbath dawned, the crowd came to Jerusalem and the surrounding area to see the sealed crypt. Now notice that this is not, we didn't have a crowd come, right? But during the night on which the Lord's day dawned, when the soldiers stood guard 2 by 2 on their watch, a great voice came from the sky. They saw the skies open and 2 men descend from there. They were very bright and drew near the tomb. The stone cast before the entrance rolled away by itself. I like that it just kind of rolls away. And moved to one side. The tomb was open and both young men entered. When the soldiers saw these things, they woke up the centurion and the elders, for they were also there on guard. So we have Roman soldiers there, as well as Jewish religious leaders. As they were explaining what they had seen, notice we have men seeing these things. That's kind of important, right? They saw 3 men emerge from the tomb, 2 of them supporting the other, with a cross following behind them. And this is an interesting way to show it. So now we have Jesus coming out of the tomb. They saw him coming out of the tomb. Do we see Jesus coming out of the tomb? No, just not. The heads of the 2 reached up to the sky, but the head of the one they were leading went up above the skies. That's interesting. And they heard a voice from the skies, "Have you preached to those who are asleep?" And a reply came from the cross, "Yes." They then decided among themselves to go off to disclose what happened to Pilate. While they were still making their plans, the skies were again seen to open, and a person descended and entered the crypt. Those who were with the centurion saw these things and hurried to Pilate at night, abandoning the tomb they had been guarding, and explained everything they had seen. Greatly agitated, they said, "He actually was the Son of God." Now, that's not just the centurion, but they, all of these, the soldiers who were there. Pilate replied, I am clean of the blood of the Son of God. You decided to do this. So I guess, I'm sorry, it's actually the Jewish elders who were there as well. So then everyone approached him to ask and urge him to order the centurion and the soldiers to say nothing about what they had seen, and it goes on. So this is a rewriting of it, and it makes it more acceptable, if you will, because we see them coming out, we see all of this stuff happening, and we have men witnessing it, which then would be legal to use them as witnesses instead of the women who are, well, you know, they're just women, I don't know. So yes, there is another version. Never made it in the Bible. If you wonder why, that would be why. Because first of all, it's written late, and it has a different understanding as well. So I'm sorry I forgot that earlier, but I wanted to point that out. There are several books, interesting. These are just some of them, but the titles of things such as the Gospel of the Nazarenes, of the Ebionites, according to the Hebrews, according to the Egyptians, of course, the Gospel of Thomas. There's a papyrus of the unknown gospel. Then Peter, Mary, Philip, and another Thomas also. Oh, that's the infancy gospel of Thomas. They all have gospels. The proto-gospel of James, the epistle of the apostles, the Coptic apocalypse of Peter, the secret gospel of Mark. So there's a secret gospel. So then there are non-canonical Acts of the Apostles, of Acts of John, Paul, Thecla, Thomas, and Peter. So there are a variety of other writings. And some of these folks, when you read these, it's why aren't these, and these should be just as valid as the ones that made it, or the ones that are in the Bible, or the ones that touch the hearts and lives of people who were believing and they shared it with one another. That's how they kind of ended up there, I think. So we have 2 minutes.
The stone rolling itself away, I love that idea, because remember he told us that we could move mountains and we just believe. So what's a little stone?
But it's interesting, I think it was Matthew that emphasizes, in Matthew's resurrection story, that the angel moved it, which I think we all go, yeah, it had to be an angel or something. But I like it when they came out that the cross is following the one.
Yeah, that's
you know,
funny.
You know, that's just interesting. Kind of like hopping, bing, 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 bing. I don't know what that.
The cross was
And the
on
two, the heads reaches the heavens and one above the
above
heavens.
the heavens.
I'm trying to picture that. It's just an interesting
Yeah.
thing. Okay. So next week we'll look at the proposed endings, the alternate endings. We'll talk about them, look at what the text is. You probably have never, I don't know if you ever seen, have you ever seen the short ending? Not the verses 9 through 20. Have you ever seen the other one? I'm not sure if anybody has in the Bible. Well, you'll see it next week. We'll give that to you. So let's close with a little prayer and send you on your way. Gracious Lord, we thank you that we know you are risen from the dead, and that yet you remain the crucified one for us, the one who died on the cross to take away all our sin. Help us to so believe, and believing, help us to share that good news with the world that you give us. So bless us this day as we go forth from here, that on this great day of Pentecost, we, like those first disciples, might be encouraged to proclaim you and who we are and all that we say, even how we live. We ask you to bless us in that way in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. Thank you, ladies and germs.
Thank you. This is about you.
Very interesting.